They say the emperor forged his sons in fire and storm. His sons, the Primarchs, were beings of superhuman might, each destined to lead legions in his great crusade to unite the galaxy. But before any of them were found, before even their names were whispered, there was one legion, first to march, first to bleed, first to bear the weight of the Emperor's ambition. The First Legion, the Dark Angels. You came here for the First Legion's secret, and you will have it. But secrets never begin with betrayal. They begin with creation, with the fire that burned before the shadow fell. The Emperor's conquest of Terra was not a campaign of diplomacy. It was slaughter and thunder, a war against techno-barbarian warlords and mutant empires that had ruled in the ashes of old night. At his side stood the Thunder Warriors, monstrous killers, larger than mortal men, stronger, faster, burning with unstable life. They won him Earth, but they could not win him the stars. They were doomed by design, burning too hot to endure. And so, in vaults hidden deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, the Emperor began a different kind of experiment. The Dark Angels were the result, the first fruits of the gene-forging project that would one day create 18 legions of Astartes. But unlike those who came after, the first were not perfected by lessons learned. They were the test. Their bodies carried flaws no one yet knew how to refine. Their armor was experimental, their weapons prototypes. And yet, they endured. They did not collapse like the Thunder Warriors. They did not falter beneath the Emperor's gaze. They were stronger than what came before, more stable, and utterly loyal. They were proof that his dream could stand. But being first brought a burden no other legion could ever match. They were the Emperor's scalpel in his earliest wars, carving open the strongholds of old night. They fought not with the pride of later legions, but with the cold weight of necessity. They were forged from Terra itself, men drawn from the techno-hives and ash wastes, from tribes who had known nothing but blood and rust. Terran recruits shaped the First Legion's earliest culture, disciplined, grim, and utterly pragmatic. They carried no world's heraldry, no knightly myths. They were the Emperor's creatures alone. Imagine them on the battlefield, their armor blackened by soot and gun oil, their visors glaring red through the storm. They had no banners of honor, no romantic sagas, only war. They fought with brutal efficiency, breaking warlords with blade and bolter, drowning mutant empires in fire, crushing Psyker Kings beneath the tread of their tanks. They were silent, merciless, faceless. In their anonymity, they became a legend whispered even then, the Angels of Death. And yet, within them was something else, something that set them apart from the start. They were not only soldiers, they were prototypes. The Emperor gave them weapons no other legion would wield until much later. Plasma arms that burned too hot for stability, void suits designed for boarding actions, blades cut from patterns rediscovered in the dust of the dark age of technology. They tested it all, suffered its failures, carried its triumphs. When another legion marched forth with perfected tools, it was because the first had already bled for them. But the First Legion's place was not only on Terra. When the Unification Wars neared their end, when the last tyrants were dragged down and the Emperor's standard rose over the Palace of Terra, it was the Dark Angels who spearheaded the first true campaigns into the wider galaxy. They were the Emperor's proof to mankind that his war would not end with Earth. They burned across the stars, culling Xenos enclaves and petty human empires that had risen in isolation. And everywhere they went, they carried the weight of being the first. Always watched, always measured, always judged. To be the First Legion was not only an honor, it was a shadow. Every other legion would come and know its own pre-march, its own culture, its own pride. But the Dark Angels would always be the Emperor's baseline, the test case, the mirror by which all others were judged. Even when their pre-march was found, even when their ranks swelled, that burden would remain. And beneath their iron discipline, resentment grew like embers beneath ash. For to be first is to be forgotten. They bore the Emperor's faith before any of their brothers ever drew breath. And yet, in time, even their place at his side would be questioned. And that is the secret heartbeat of the Dark Angel's story. Pride born of being the first, shame born of never being trusted, and a silence heavy enough to crack a legion. Because the Emperor gave them everything first, and yet he gave them nothing truly their own. Reunification. The Lion leads. They say reunion between father and son is meant to heal what was broken. But when the Lion met the Emperor, it was not healing that defined it. It was weight. The weight of command. The weight of being the first. The weight of leading a legion already fractured by secrets. From the moment he bowed before his father, the Lion was no longer simply the master of Caliban. He was the pre-march of the Dark Angels, and the shadows around him only deepened. The Emperor did not linger on Caliban. His great crusade pressed ever outward, and the Lion had a role to play. Terra's firstborn legion had fought for decades without their pre-march, guided by commanders who were disciplined, yes, but ultimately fallible. The moment the Lion took command, everything changed. His silence, his relentless precision, his cold aura of authority, it reshaped the legion. The Dark Angels became an extension of his will, a weapon honed to a razor's edge. But that weapon was already divided. For the First Legion was unique among all. Its ranks were filled with Terrans, warriors of old Earth who had marched since the Unification Wars. Hardened killers, tempered by the Emperor's early wars, who had forged the Dark Angel's identity long before the Lion was found. And now, alongside them, came the Calibanites, fierce knightly recruits, raised in a world of monsters and honor duels, drawn from the orders the Lion had united. At first, it was celebrated as strength. Two cultures merged into one legion. But beneath the surface, suspicion festered. The Terrans saw the Calibanites as provincial, too wild, too attached to their old ways. The Calibanites saw the Terrans as cold, arrogant, and alien, warriors of a world they could never call home. And the Lion, who trusted only silence, never addressed it. He commanded both sides with the same iron will, expecting obedience, but rarely offering understanding. It worked in war. On campaign, the Legion was unstoppable. The Lion cared little for politics, little for the social games his brothers played. He sought only victory. When he unleashed the Dark Angels, they fought with such discipline and ferocity that worlds fell in weeks. Enemy fleets crumbled before their precise strikes. Xeno's strongholds burned under their calculated fury. No legion combined overwhelming firepower and surgical precision so seamlessly. They were both hammer and scalpel, crushing and cutting in the same breath. But in their camps, aboard their fleets, the tension never vanished. Calibanite officers rose in prominence, favored by the Lion, who trusted them as his own kind. The Terrans, who had borne the Legion through its earliest crucibles, began to feel eclipsed. In silence, resentment grew. Luther stood at the heart of this divide. Once the Lion's brother-in-arms on Caliban, he was given a place of honor within the Legion. The Emperor himself had elevated him, granting him command of forces in the Lion's name. But Luther was no pre-march. He was mortal, brilliant, yes, charismatic, yes, but not a son of the Emperor. And though he loved the Lion as a brother, there was a wound in his heart that never healed. He knew he would always stand in the Lion's shadow. That shadow grew darker as the crusade pressed on. The Lion's brilliance on campaign won him respect among his peers, but also suspicion. He revealed little, spoke little, kept his strategies hidden even from his closest captains until the moment of execution. To his enemies, it was devastating. To his allies, it was unnerving. He did not court friendship as Horus did, nor inspire faith like Sanguinius, nor forge empires like Gilliman. He simply commanded, and his legion mirrored his silence. The result was a legion feared and respected, but never beloved. Other legions traded tales of honor and camaraderie. The Dark Angels traded only victories. They were the first, the most secretive, and increasingly, the most distrusted. And yet, the Lion's methods worked. The Dark Angels crushed Orc empires on the eastern fringe, burned through Xeno's enclaves hidden in forgotten sectors, and executed campaigns of such precision that even Guilliman acknowledged their efficiency. They were often deployed where failure could not be tolerated, where precision mattered more than glory. In the records of the Crusade, they are sometimes described as a knife in the dark, as much as an army of angels. But war is not only won with blades. It is also won with trust. And in this, the Lion faltered. His secrecy alienated his brothers. His reliance on Calibanite recruits deepened a rift within his legion. His cold distance ensured that even victories bred unease. The Lion believed silence was strength. But silence is also fertile soil for suspicion. The Emperor, perhaps, understood this. Perhaps he knew the burden of the First Legion was heavier than any pre-march could carry alone. Perhaps that is why he left Luther behind. For after years of campaigning, after battle upon battle across the stars, the Lion returned to Caliban. And there, the Emperor ordered that Luther, and many Calibanite warriors with him, were to remain, to guard their homeworld, to serve in exile, far from the Great Crusade. It was meant as a reward, or so it was framed. Caliban was no longer a wilderness of monsters. It was to be remade as a jewel of the Imperium. Someone had to oversee its transformation, its elevation to a world of culture and learning. Who better than Luther, the Lion's brother, the man who had stood beside him since the beginning? But Luther knew the truth. He had been cast aside, stripped from the crusade, denied glory, denied the chance to stand in the stars beside his brother. To Luther, it was betrayal. To the Calibanites left with him, it was insult. The seeds of bitterness grew roots. And while the Lion pressed on with his crusade, carving victory after victory for the Imperium, those roots twisted deeper. It is one of the cruel truths of the Dark Angel's story, that their greatest victories were always shadowed by unseen fractures, that every triumph hid a wound that would one day bleed. The Lion did not see it, or perhaps he did, and simply believed his silence would hold it at bay. But no silence lasts forever. The First Legion had been born of shadows, and in shadows, they were destined to remain. The First Legion was never simply another army. They were the pattern, the measure, the yardstick by which all others were judged. To call them warriors is too little. They were the Emperor's experiment, his scalpel, his hammer, his secret hand. To the galaxy, they were angels. To their brothers, they were a reminder. For no matter how great another legion became, the Dark Angels were first. From the earliest years of the Great Crusade, the Dark Angels stood apart, not only because of their pre-march, though Lionel Johnson's presence sharpened them into a weapon few could match, but because of what they carried: tools, secrets, weapons older than the Imperium itself. The First Legion had always been a proving ground, their veins filled with half-tested genocide, their hands entrusted with relics too dangerous to risk elsewhere. While other legions marched with bolter and blade, the Dark Angels bore plasma cannons that burned white-hot, Volkite chargers whose beams unmade flesh, and armor patterns never seen before or since. This was not favoritism. It was function. They were the Emperor's firstborn legionaries, and so they were given every experiment to carry into war. If it succeeded, other legions would adopt it. If it failed, the Dark Angels bore the cost. They suffered quietly, their gene lines tested, their arsenals dangerous. And yet, in enduring, they became the most adaptable of all. They could fight as armored hosts, as strike forces, as covert hunters in the void. They learned every style of war because they had to. They were the template. The Lion embraced this burden with his cold precision. He cared little for the politics of who was favored. He sought only efficiency, mastery, victory. Under his command, the Dark Angels became a legion feared even among their own kin. Their structure fractured into specialized formations. The Hexagrammaton, 6 great wings of war, each honed to a different aspect of battle. The Raven Wing for speed and hunt. The Death Wing for unbreakable assault. The Iron Wing, the Fire Wing, the Storm Wing, the Dread Wing. Each formation in answer to a different kind of war. Together, they formed a whole so intricate, so balanced, that no enemy could stand against them for long. This was the genius of the First Legion. They were not one army. They were 6 armies, united in one name, one command. Where another legion might falter against unfamiliar foes, the Dark Angels adapted with surgical efficiency. The Lion's mind worked in layers and labyrinths, and his legion reflected him. Secrets within secrets, plans within plans. The Hexagrammaton was not simply doctrine. It was the Lion's shadow, made manifest in his sons. It was this mastery that earned them their title, first among equals, not in arrogance, though pride burned in their hearts, but in function. The Emperor himself often sent the Dark Angels where the cost of failure was too high to risk any other legion. They were deployed to the Rangdan genocides, wars so brutal and apocalyptic that much of their record remains sealed to this day. Entire human civilizations were obliterated, alien horrors purged from the stars, the Imperium's survival hanging by a thread. The Dark Angels did not only fight in these wars, they endured them. They bore scars deeper than words can capture. Other legions would falter, break, or burn in madness. The Dark Angels did not. They fought until the Rangdan were no more, and in that silence, their legend only deepened. And yet, with legend comes shadow. The First Legion's silence was not born of reverence. It was necessity. Too much of what they carried was forbidden. The Hexagrammaton was not known in full to any outside their ranks. The weapons they wielded were often sealed after their use, locked away, erased from records. Their campaigns were victories, but they were also mysteries. They grew feared not only by their enemies, but by their allies. What did the Dark Angels truly hide? What price had they paid for victories that others could barely understand? Among the Primarchs, this aloofness bred suspicion. Guilliman, master of order, respected the Lion's precision, but distrusted his silence. Leman Russ, Wolf King of Fenris, saw in the Lion a predator too cold, too calculating. Horus, the War Master himself, treated his brother with courtesy, but even he wondered what lay beneath that unreadable gaze. The Lion made no effort to dispel these doubts. He revealed nothing more than he must. He believed secrets were weapons, and he would never disarm himself. But to his legion, this secrecy was gospel. They saw themselves not as one legion among many, but as the prototype, the hidden foundation of all others. The first, the template, and pride followed. They whispered that without them, the others could never have been, that their silence was not shame, but necessity, for they bore the weight of truths too terrible for others to endure. This pride made them formidable. It also made them distant. Where the Luna Wolves inspired loyalty, where the Ultramarines built empires, where the Blood Angels spread glory, the Dark Angels carried only silence. They did not seek friends. They did not seek love. They sought only victory. And in that silence, their shadows grew. Because to be first is not only honor, it is also burden. Every success was demanded, not celebrated. Every failure was magnified. They could never be merely one legion among many. They were always the example, the measure, the mirror. Even the Lion, with all his brilliance, could not escape that shadow. He was firstborn of the Emperor's vision, but never trusted as its heart. Horus would become War Master. Guilliman would become statesman. Sanguinius would become beloved. But the Lion would always be feared. In war, this mattered little. Victory was enough. But in peace, in brotherhood, in trust, it left the First Legion isolated. And isolation breeds secrecy. Secrecy breeds suspicion. Suspicion becomes shadow. So it was with the Dark Angels. So it was with their Lion. The galaxy saw only their victories, their silence, their perfection. What they did not see was the cracks, the rivalry with the wolves, the unease of the crusade, the division within their own ranks between Terran veterans and Calibanite knights. What they did not see was that being first made them most vulnerable of all. For in silence, no one can hear you fracture, and the Dark Angels were already beginning to fracture. They say brothers are forged in fire, but tested in shadow. The Primarchs were never meant to be rivals. Each was designed for war, for conquest, for the Emperor's vision. And yet, Rivalry became their nature. Among them, the lion was a riddle, respected for his brilliance, feared for his silence, distrusted for his secrecy. He was first, but never beloved, and his brothers felt it. From the moment he rejoined the Great Crusade, the lion stood apart from his kin. Not because he lacked greatness. None doubted his tactical brilliance. In campaign after campaign, the Dark Angels proved themselves a legion that could fight any war, wield any weapon, master any strategy. Their victories rivaled those of Horus himself. But greatness in war is not the same as greatness among brothers. And here, the lion was found wanting. The first fractures came with Leman Russ. The Wolf King of Fenris was as different from the lion as night from day. Russ was loud, boisterous, unrestrained, quick to laugh and quicker to brawl. He built bonds in fire and drink, his legion a reflection of his wild spirit. The lion was his opposite, cold, measured, deliberate, every word weighed, every secret guarded. Where Russ trusted his instincts, the lion trusted his calculations. Where Russ trusted his warriors as kin, the lion trusted only himself. It was inevitable that the two would clash. Their most infamous quarrel came at Dulin. The Rangdan Xenocides had scarred the Imperium, but it was at Dulin, against a human empire of tyrants and warlords, that the lion and Russ rivalry burned into legend. The wolves had fought ferociously, but it was the Dark Angels who struck the decisive blow. The lion, cold and efficient, killed the tyrant of Dulin with his own hand, and in so doing, robbed Russ of the kill he believed was his by right. Russ, furious, challenged him. The two Primarchs fought a duel that shook the walls of the fortress itself. Blow after blow was exchanged, until at last the lion felled Russ with a calculated strike. But instead of accepting victory, he offered his brother a hand, and when Russ reached for it, the lion struck him down again. The duel ended not with honor, but with bitterness. The Emperor intervened, forbidding their feud from tearing further into the crusade. But the damage was done. Russ never forgave the lion's cold pragmatism, and the lion, for his part, never cared for Russ' need for honor. Their rivalry festered, a shadow that would outlast both of them. Even millennia later, in the 41st millennium, their sons remember the grudge, as if the wounds of Dulin were carved into their very gene seed. But Russ was not the only brother the lion crossed. With Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, there was no camaraderie to begin with. Kurz saw in the lion a reflection of himself, ruthless, calculating, secretive. But where the lion wielded silence as discipline, Kurz embraced darkness as prophecy. The two despised each other almost instinctively. Their legions clashed in campaigns where suspicion turned to open hostility. Kurz accused the lion of arrogance, of believing himself judge over all. The lion dismissed Kurz as a madman, a creature of nightmares. They were mirrors, and they hated what they saw. Even Horus, the War Master, though outwardly cordial, held the lion at a distance. Horus built his greatness on bonds, on trust, on winning the loyalty of his brothers. The lion never offered trust, and so Horus never gave him love. He respected the lion's victories, yes, but he also knew the lion was unpredictable, silent, unreadable, a piece on the board that could never be fully controlled. And to Horus, who thrived on control, that was dangerous. Only Guilliman, master of Ultramar, seemed to see some reflection of kinship in the lion. Both were strategists, both sought order, both prized efficiency over glory. But even Guilliman found the lion's secrecy unsettling. He could not understand why the lion kept so much hidden, why he cloaked even his own legion structures in layers of silence. Guilliman sought transparency, rules, codexes. The lion offered none, and so even this kinship remained uneasy. This was the pattern of the lion's life: respected, but not trusted; feared, but not loved; always apart, always secretive. And his legion absorbed this pattern like a second skin. The Dark Angels did not mingle freely with their cousins. They shared victories, but not truth. They fought with brilliance, but revealed little. They became what their pre-march was, shadowed, secretive, and alone among the stars. And yet, in battle, none could deny their mastery. The duel with Russet Dullan had not diminished them. If anything, it had reinforced their image as the legion that won by calculation, by precision, by being first to strike and last to fall. To the Imperium's enemies, they were nightmares in black. To their brothers, they were enigmas. To the Lion himself, none of it mattered. He sought only victory. But here lies the tragedy. War is not only fought with blades and bolters. It is fought with trust. The Horus Heresy would prove that. And when it came, the Dark Angels would find themselves isolated, not by treachery, but by their own silence. For even as the Lion fought alongside his brothers, he never truly stood with them. His legion was his world, his shadow his armor. And when shadows fall, they hide more than enemies. They hide betrayal. They hide doubt. They hide secrets that even the Emperor's light cannot pierce. The Lion's brothers learned to distrust him. The Imperium whispered about his legion. And within the Dark Angels themselves, cracks began to spread. Because even the greatest warrior cannot fight the war of brothers alone. And the Lion, for all his brilliance, had no other way. Every legion carried a flaw. Some were too proud, others too wild, others too broken by rage. But the Dark Angels carried a flaw unlike any other. Their wound was not in their gene seed, but in their soul. The First Legion was not undone by the enemy. It was undone by itself. And the seeds of its undoing were planted long before the heresy, on Caliban. When the Lion marched at the Emperor's side, Caliban was left behind. To many of the Calibanite recruits who had filled the Dark Angels' ranks, this was insult enough. Their homeworld reduced to a backwater garrison while their brothers won glory among the stars. But to Luther, it was betrayal. Luther had been the Lion's brother, his closest companion, the man who raised him from the forests. For years, they had fought together, united the knightly orders, cleansed Caliban of its beasts. Without Luther, the Lion's rise would never have been possible. And yet, when the Emperor came, it was not Luther who was raised to Primarchhood, but the boy he had found in the wild. At first, Luther accepted his fate. He served loyally in the Legion, commanding fleets, leading warriors, earning victories in the Lion's name. But the Emperor's decree that Luther would remain behind on Caliban, governing the planet while the Lion campaigned, cut deep. It was a command dressed as honor. Protect your home, oversee its transformation into an imperial world. But Luther knew what it truly was. Exile, a reminder that no matter how great his deeds, he was only mortal. He would never stand among the Emperor's chosen sons. And so Luther's bitterness grew. Around him, Caliban changed. Once a world of wild forests and beast-haunted ruins, it now became a fortress world of the Imperium. Massive bastions rose, great manufactoria churned, and imperial scholars reshaped its culture. But beneath the surface, resentment spread like rot. The Calibanite warriors left behind with Luther began to feel abandoned, discarded by their legion. They whispered that the Terran-born Dark Angels treated them as lesser, that the Lion trusted only a chosen few. They whispered that perhaps Caliban itself had been betrayed. In Luther's halls, these whispers grew louder. He had always been charismatic, a leader born of words as much as deeds. The warriors looked to him as their true father, their true guide. And Luther, wounded by jealousy, began to nurture their doubts. Not openly, not yet, but in subtle ways, with careful words, with lingering silences. He spoke of how the Lion had forgotten them, of how the Imperium demanded their loyalty but gave little in return, of how the Emperor's empire was built on sacrifice, but never gratitude. The Legion's fracture was not sudden. It was slow, insidious. Terran veterans sneered at Calibanite pride. Calibanites muttered of being second-class sons. Even those who served loyally felt the divide. The Lion, as ever, remained silent, never explaining, never easing tensions. He believed discipline and obedience were enough. But silence cannot heal a wound. it only lets it fester. The result was a legion split in two cultures. On campaign, the Terrans dominated. At home, the Calibanites brooded. And in the gulf between them, Luther's bitterness hardened into something darker. Some say Luther began to dabble in forbidden lore, in texts left behind from Caliban's Age of Monsters. Books that spoke not of beasts of flesh, but of the warp. Some say the warp storms that gathered around Caliban were drawn by his resentment, by his corruption. What is certain is this: by the time the heresy began, Luther's loyalty was already poisoned. Yet even then, the lion remained blind. He continued his wars across the stars, directing the dark angels against the Imperium's enemies. He left Caliban in Luther's hands, trusting him as he always had, believing the fortress world secure. He never saw that in the silence of his absence, a shadow was growing. For Caliban had never been just another world. It had always been different, cursed, tainted. The beasts the knights had slain were not natural creatures. They were mutants, twisted echoes of the warp, remnants of a corruption deeper than flesh. The planet itself seemed to carry scars of chaos. And as the lion turned his gaze to the crusade, that corruption began to whisper again. To Luther, to the Calibanites left behind, to the warriors who fell betrayed by their Primarch's silence. Whispers in the dark, promises of strength, promises of freedom, promises of vengeance. The fallen were being born, not yet in open rebellion, not yet in fire and blood, but in thought, in doubt, in whispers. A seed planted in the Legion's heart, and that is the cruelest part of the Dark Angels' tragedy. Their flaw was never only pride, or secrecy, or even Luther's jealousy. It was trust misplaced. The lion, for all his brilliance in war, never saw the storm rising behind him. He never understood that his silence, his distance, his refusal to heal the wound between Terran and Calibanite had left space for corruption to take root. When a heresy came, the Dark Angels would be tested like every legion. But their test did not begin with Horus Rebellion. It began here, on Caliban, in the halls where Luther whispered, in the silence where doubts grew. The First Legion was always first to be forged, first to fight, first to bear the Emperor's burdens. But they were also the first to fracture. Their shadows stretched long across the stars. And in those shadows, betrayal already stirred. They say the Horus heresy was born in fire, but for some, it began in silence. When half the galaxy burned with treachery, when brother turned upon brother, the Dark Angels were not at Terra, nor at Istvan, nor the first great betrayals. They were elsewhere, and in that absence, a shadow fell upon them that has never lifted. When Horus declared his rebellion, the Imperium cracked like glass. The War Master, once the Emperor's most beloved son, revealed himself as traitor, and the galaxy was torn in two. Legions marched against legions, worlds burned, faith was shattered, and the First Legion, the Dark Angels, found themselves far from the heart of the storm. At the opening of the heresy, the Dark Angels were embroiled in wars that had already tested them to breaking, the Rangdan genocides. Few wars in the history of the Imperium are spoken of with such dread. The Rangdan were a Xeno's threat so vile, so apocalyptic, that much of their record is still sealed in forbidden archives. They were not a species, but a nightmare, wielding weapons that warped reality, unleashing horrors that devoured entire populations. Entire sectors were drenched in blood. The Dark Angels fought on the front lines of that nightmare. For decades, they waged war in silence, cutting down an enemy so terrible that the Imperium itself sought to erase the memory. Their casualties were immense, their victories Pyrrhic. Some say it was this war that kept them from Terra, that the Emperor himself had demanded they cleanse this threat before all else. Others whisper that it was no accident, that the lion was sent away, kept far from the heart of the Imperium's betrayal, because the Emperor trusted him, or feared him. When news of Horus' treachery reached them, the Dark Angels were already bled white from Rangdan slaughter. The lion received the word with his usual silence, revealing nothing of his mind to his officers. But his actions spoke clearly. He turned his legion, vast fleets and shattered hosts, toward the heart of the Imperium. He would not sit idle. He would not betray. He would march for Terra. And yet, nothing is ever simple with the lion. For while he marched, he also calculated. The lion did not move with blind loyalty, nor with Horus passion. He moved with cold precision. The heresy was not only a war of loyalty, it was a war of survival. And the lion, ever secretive, ever cautious, began to weave plans within plans. Some of these plans are still debated even now. One of the most infamous is his dealing with the forge world of Tiamat. When Horus first revealed his rebellion, the Dark Angels were sent to secure critical weaponry from Mechanicum worlds whose loyalties were uncertain. On Tiamat, the lion ensured that the weapons fell into Imperial hands. But when questioned about his motives, even by his own sons, he revealed little. Was it loyalty, pragmatism, or something darker? The truth is that the lion never explained himself. Not to his legion, not to his brothers, not even to the Emperor. He believed in action, not words. But in the silence of his explanations, suspicion grew. Other legions whispered. Why was the first not at Terra? Why was the lion's loyalty never clear? Why did he seem to play both sides, calculating advantage instead of declaring openly? Even among the loyalists, the lion's reputation suffered. Some said he sought to position himself as the Emperor's heir, should Horus fall. Others said he waited to see which side would prevail, ready to strike only when victory was certain. Still others claimed he plotted to seize the Imperium for himself, turning both traitor and loyalist alike into pawns. The lion himself ignored these whispers. He fought. He maneuvered. He sought victory not only on the battlefield, but in the grander game of the heresy. One example, his pursuit of Kurz, the Night Haunter. During the heresy, the lion's fleets hunted Kurz across the galaxy. Again and again they clashed, brutal battles of shadow and blood. The lion sought to end his brother's terror. But Kurz was more than a foe. He was a mirror, a creature of fear and secrecy, reflecting back the lion's own darkness. Their war was never clean. It was obsession, and it bled the Dark Angels further, dragging them from the siege of Terra, even as the galaxy's fate was decided. And so, when the traitor legions descended upon the Imperial Palace, when the Emperor himself battled Horus aboard the War Master's flagship, the Dark Angels were not there. Their absence was a wound that has never healed. Other legions bled at Terra, the Blood Angels, the Imperial Fists, the White Scars. But the first? They were too far away, their fleets locked in campaigns of their own, their pre-march entangled in wars of shadow. To this day, whispers haunt them. Were they truly delayed by circumstance? Or did the lion hold them back, waiting to see the outcome? Was their absence accident or intention? The Dark Angels deny the whispers, of course. They claim loyalty beyond question, that they fought where the Emperor commanded, that they could not reach Terra in time. And perhaps that is true. But in the grim darkness of the far future, truth is a rare and fragile thing. What is certain is this. By the time the lion's fleets turned toward Terra, the war was already decided. The Emperor lay upon the golden throne, mortally wounded. Horus was dead. The traitor legions scattered. And the Dark Angels, the first legion, the Emperor's prototype, his most secret weapon, arrived too late. For the rest of time, this absence would haunt them. No matter how loudly they proclaimed their loyalty, no matter how fiercely they hunted the fallen, no matter how many victories they carved in the Emperor's name, the stain remained. Where were the first when the throne bled? Where was the lion when the Emperor faced his greatest trial? The answer, whispered in every corner of the Imperium, is silence. And silence, for the Dark Angels, has always been the most damning shadow of all. Betrayal does not come from enemies. It comes from those closest, from brothers, from family. And for the Dark Angels, betrayal was not a thunderclap from Horus. It was a whisper from Caliban. The heresy may have torn the galaxy in half, but the First Legion's true wound came from within its own heart, from Luther, and from those who came to be called the Fallen. While the galaxy burned in Horus rebellion, Caliban seemed distant, untouched. But appearances are illusions, and beneath the fortress bastions of the First Legion's homeworld, shadows deepened. The Lion was far away, chasing curs, fighting Xeno's remnants, weaving strategies that may never be fully understood. His absence left Luther as master of Caliban, governor of the First Legion's fortress world. And in that absence, jealousy twisted into rebellion. Luther's bitterness had never healed. He had been the Lion's closest brother, his companion since the forest days. He had been his equal in the knightly orders, the man who united Caliban's warriors at his side. Yet in the Imperium, he was nothing but second. Not a Primarch, not a mortal, not chosen. A mortal man, left behind, condemned to govern while his brother strode among the stars as a god of war. That wound festered for years, and when the heresy began, it found fertile ground. Around Luther, the Calibanites left behind shared his resentment. They had not marched with the Lion into glory. They had not fought at Ronda, or Dulin, or the countless crusades. They were consigned to their home, discarded while Terran veterans and frontline Dark Angels carved the Imperium's history. To them, the Lion's loyalty to Terra was betrayal of Caliban. And Luther, ever charismatic, gave their anger voice. At first, it was subtle. Luther spoke of freedom, of Caliban as a jewel unto itself, not a servant of a distant throne. He reminded his warriors of their knightly roots, their old vows, their pride. The Imperium demanded everything, but gave nothing in return, he said. And in those halls, men who once would have died for the Lion began to wonder if their loyalty had been misplaced. But there was more than words. Caliban itself was cursed. The monsters that had haunted its forests before the Lion's rise were not mere beasts. They were the twisted spawn of the warp, mutants and abominations whose presence hinted at deeper corruption. The planet carried scars of chaos, and in Luther's bitterness, those scars bled again. Forbidden tomes were unearthed. Sorceries whispered. The warp's tendrils crept into the hearts of men who once swore oaths of purity. One by one, warriors of the First Legion fell to doubt. They did not see themselves as traitors. They believed they were Caliban's true sons, reclaiming their destiny from a Primarch who had abandoned them. They believed the Imperium was tyranny, and that their loyalty was to the Lion's old dream, not the Emperor's golden throne. In time, they came to see the Lion himself as part of that tyranny. Thus were born the Fallen, not yet in open revolt, but already damned. They trained in secret, built armies beneath the guise of Caliban's defenses, turned their faith from the Emperor to darker powers. And Luther stood at their center, no longer the Lion's brother, but his shadow. When the Lion at last turned toward Terra, too late to join the siege, he carried his battered legion with him. They had fought for years in silence, carving victories against the Night Lords, burning through campaigns of attrition. Their fleets were scarred, their warriors weary. They returned to Caliban seeking strength, seeking to replenish, seeking the home they had left behind. What they found instead was rebellion. The reunion was a tragedy. For the Lion, Caliban had always been his cradle, his sanctuary. For Luther, it had become his kingdom. When the Lion returned, it was not as brother, but as rival. The Fallen revealed themselves at last. Armies of Calibanite warriors turned against their Primarch. Luther himself stood at their head, wielding forbidden power, his voice filled with venom against the Imperium and the Lion both. The war that followed was swift, but apocalyptic. The Lion unleashed the Dark Angels upon their own homeworld. The forests of Caliban, once cleansed of beasts, burned again in fire and bolter. The skies filled with thunder as fortress turned against fortress, as angel slew angel. Brother against brother, Calibanite against Terran, the Legion tearing itself apart in a civil war hidden from the galaxy. This was the First Legion's secret shame. While Terra bled, while the Emperor lay broken on his throne, the Dark Angels fought not traitor legions, but themselves. And they can never speak of it. For to admit that their own brothers had turned was a wound they could not survive. At the heart of the war, Luther and the Lion met. Once brothers, now enemies. Their duel shook the foundations of Caliban itself. The Lion fought with all the precision of a pre-march, but Luther, empowered by the warp, matched him blow for blow. And as they clashed, the planet itself screamed. Warp storms erupted, tearing reality apart, shredding Caliban's surface with impossible force. In the end, the Lion triumphed, but it was no victory. Luther struck him down with a psychic blow that hurled his pre-march into the rock, wounded unto death, comatose, hidden from the galaxy. Caliban itself shattered, broken by the storm. Most of the fallen were dragged into the warp, scattered across time and space. The survivors of the Legion gathered the fragments of their world into a fortress asteroid, the Rock, and swore that none would ever know the truth. The First Legion's flaw was revealed at last. Not pride, not secrecy, but betrayal from within. And their shame was eternal. For the fallen were not slain. They were scattered, and the dark angels would spend 10,000 years hunting them, hiding their secret, never speaking the truth of what had happened on Caliban. The First Legion's secret was born here, and it was a secret so heavy that it bent their destiny forever. They say loyalty is proven not in words, but in presence. To stand with your brothers when the walls fall, to bleed beside them when gods themselves descend. And when the siege of Terra came, the final stand of the Emperor, the moment that defined the fate of mankind, the Dark Angels were not there. The First Legion, the Emperor's prototype, his most secret weapon, absent. And in their absence, doubt was born that has never died. The siege of Terra was the crucible of the Age of Legions. Horus armies descended upon the throne world in apocalyptic fury, the traitor legions and their demonic allies hammering at the walls of the imperial palace. The Blood Angels, the imperial fists, the white scars, they fought with desperate valor, shoulder to shoulder, their primarchs bleeding on the battlements as the galaxy's fate hung by a thread. Even the shattered remnants of the shattered loyalist legions came to Terra, broken but present, determined to die at the Emperor's side if need be. But not the first. The Dark Angels, scattered across the stars by the Rangdan campaigns and the pursuit of curs, never reached Terra in time. The Lion, Master the First, remained absent from the greatest battle in history. His legion's fleets, scarred and weary, pressed toward the throne world. But the warp storms unleashed by Horus' rebellion made the journey impossible. By the time the Lion's ships pierced the veil, the war was already decided. Horus lay slain by the Emperor's hand. The master of mankind was entombed upon the golden throne. The traitors were fleeing into the Eye of Terror, and the First Legion had arrived too late. To the galaxy, this absence was a stain that no oath could wash away. The most loyal of all, the Emperor's firstborn, the Legion of the Lion. Where were they when Terra burned? Why did they not stand at the Emperor's side in his final battle? Whispers spread like poison. Some claimed the Lion delayed on purpose, waiting to see whether Horus or the Emperor would prevail. Others claimed he sought to claim the Imperium for himself, biding his time until both rivals were broken. Still others whispered that perhaps the Lion had fought for Horus in secret, and only turned back when the traitors were defeated. The Dark Angels denied it all. They swore their loyalty had never faltered, that they had fought where they were sent, that fate and circumstance alone kept them from Terra. But silence is fragile armor. The more they denied, the louder the whispers became. Even among their brother legions, the question lingered like a thorn. Where was the first? And within the legion itself, the absence was more than shame. It was guilt. To have missed the Emperor's final battle, to have failed to stand at his side when he faced his greatest trial, was a wound deeper than any blade. For the sons of the Lion, it became an unspoken truth. They had failed. And failure, for the First Legion, was unbearable. The Lion himself gave no comfort. True to his nature, he revealed nothing of his heart. When news of the Emperor's entombment reached him, he gave no speech, shed no tears. He turned his fleets not to Terra, but to the scattered remnants of the traitors, hunting them with cold precision. To him, loyalty was not proven by presence, but by victory. Terra had already been decided. The war was not yet done. But history does not forgive absence. For all their brilliance in war, for all their victories in silence, the Dark Angel's legacy was forever tainted by this moment. In the songs of the Imperial Fists, it was Rogal Dorn who stood firm at Terra. In the sagas of the Wolves, it was Russ who bled and howled at the walls. In the laments of the Blood Angels, it was Sanguinius who gave his life. And in all of them, the First Legion was missing. Their silence, once a weapon, became a curse. Even among their allies, suspicion festered. When Guilliman began his rebuilding of the Imperium in the wake of the Heresy, he looked upon the Dark Angels with doubt. Could they be trusted? Were they truly loyal? Or did they harbor secrets that even now threaten the Imperium? The Lion's aloofness did not ease these doubts. He offered victory, yes, but never explanation. He trusted no one but his own legion. And so the whispers grew. This was the paradox of the First Legion. They were perhaps the most loyal of all, bound to the Emperor with unshakable obedience. And yet they were also the most distrusted, cloaked in secrecy, their actions unreadable even to their brothers. To be the first was both honor and curse. And at Terra, that curse came due. The siege passed into history. The Emperor was entombed, Horus destroyed, the traitors fled. But the question remained, where was the first? And it has never been answered. Not by the Lion, not by his sons, not even by time. And so the Dark Angels became what they would remain forever after. A legion defined not only by victory, but by silence. Their absence at Terra became the seed of their eternal secrecy. For if they could not explain where they were in the galaxy's darkest hour, then perhaps they could never explain anything at all. And in the silence, a deeper tragedy brewed. For while the galaxy whispered about their absence at Terra, the true betrayal was not in the void. It was back on Caliban, where Luther's rebellion rose like a storm. The Lion had missed the Emperor's final stand. And now, as he returned to his homeworld, he would face his own. The gravest wounds are not struck by the enemy's hand, but by one's own. For the Dark Angels, it was not Horus, nor Russ, nor even the Xenos horrors of the Rangdan that dealt their deepest scar. It was Caliban, their home, their cradle, their curse. When the First Legion returned in triumph, it was not to banners and celebration, but to betrayal. And in that betrayal, their greatest secret was born. The siege of Terra was over. Horus was dead. The Emperor was entombed on the Golden Throne. The traitors had fled into the Eye of Terror. Across the galaxy, the legions limped home, scarred and broken. The Dark Angels were no different. Their fleets were weary, their warriors bloodied. They had missed Terra, missed the defining battle of the age. And so the Lion turned his eyes to Caliban, his homeworld, his fortress, the jewel of the first. But Caliban was not as he had left it. For while the Lion had fought his wars across the stars, Luther had forged his own war in silence. The Calibanites left behind had grown bitter, resentful of their exclusion from the Great Crusade. They whispered that the Imperium cared nothing for them, that the Lion had abandoned them, that Caliban itself had been betrayed. And Luther, once brother to the Lion, now rival, had fanned those whispers into flame. When the Dark Angels' fleets approached Caliban, they did not see banners of welcome. They saw defenses raised against them, orbital guns turned toward their ships, fortress bastions bristling with firepower, armies of their own brethren, clad in the black and bone of the First Legion, waiting with weapons drawn. The fallen had revealed themselves at last. The Lion's response was swift, as ever. He wasted no words, offered no plea. He unleashed the fury of his legion. The skies of Caliban split with thunder as orbital bombardments rained upon the planet. The forest that had once birthed the Lion burned again in fire and ash. Angel fought angel in battles of fratricide, Terran veterans against Calibanite rebels, brothers who had once stood shoulder to shoulder, now tearing each other apart. It was the First Legion's greatest shame, and it could never be spoken of. To admit it would be to shatter the very foundation of their loyalty. And so they fought in silence, burying their own betrayal beneath the firestorm. At the heart of the war stood Luther, once the Lion's brother, his equal, his closest companion. Now, warped by jealousy, embittered by exile, and whispered to by powers from the warp, he had become something else. He saw himself as the true heir of Caliban, the savior of its people from the Lion's tyranny. His words carried weight, his charisma binding the fallen together in defiance of their pre-march. He was no longer simply Luther. He was rebellion made flesh. The inevitable came. The Lion and Luther met in battle. Their duel was more than physical. It was the collapse of everything they had once shared. The Lion, wielding the Emperor's gift of strength and precision, struck with cold fury. Luther, empowered by the dark whispers of the warp, met him blow for blow. The earth shook beneath their clash. Fortresses crumbled. The very skies bled with the storm their hatred summoned. But in the end, betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Luther struck a psychic blow that pierced even the Lion's pre-march form. The Lion fell, grievously wounded, cast into a state of eternal slumber. Not dead, not alive. A shadow of himself, hidden away within the rock that would one day orbit the stars as the Dark Angel's fortress monastery. And as their duel tore the fabric of reality, the warp itself answered. A storm of impossible power erupted across Caliban. The planet cracked and screamed as the immaterium tore through its core. Mountains were ripped apart. Cities vanished into the void. Whole armies of the fallen were dragged screaming into the warp, scattered across time and space. Some were hurled into distant centuries, others into alien realms, others lost forever. The fallen were not destroyed. They were scattered. When the storm cleared, Caliban was gone. All that remained was ruin, fragments of the world bound together in orbit. From those ruins, the Dark Angels salvaged what they could. The largest fragment became their fortress, the Rock, a vast astral monastery carrying within it the tomb of their Lion, who lay in slumber, hidden even from his sons. The fallen were gone, but not erased. Luther was captured, imprisoned in the deepest vaults of the Rock, his mind broken by the backlash of his own rebellion. The rest of the fallen were scattered across the galaxy, cast into the warp's currents like ashes into the wind. And so began the eternal burden of the First Legion, the hunt. They swore an oath of silence. None beyond their own could ever know what had happened on Caliban. The Imperium would never learn that the First Legion had torn itself apart, that half of their brothers had betrayed them, that their pre-march had been struck down not by Horus, not by traitors, but by his own brother. It was a secret so heavy that it defined them forever after. From that day, the Dark Angels were no longer simply warriors. They became keepers of a shame too great to reveal. Their silence, once a weapon, became a prison. Their victories, once celebrated, became overshadowed by a single truth they could never speak. The fall of Caliban was not simply a battle. It was the moment the First Legion was broken. It was the moment their loyalty became doubt, their pride became obsession, their silence became damnation. The galaxy would remember them as the Emperor's angels of death. But they would remember themselves as something else entirely. Betrayers hunting betrayers, shadows chasing shadows, sworn to a secret that could never be confessed. The Lion was gone. Caliban was shattered. The fallen were scattered. And the First Legion, the Emperor's firstborn, would never again be whole. They say a hero's death is glorious, sung in sagas and carved in stone. But the Lion's end was no such thing. He did not die with blade in hand, nor in defense of Terra, nor even beneath the gaze of his emperor. He fell in silence, struck down not by enemy, but by brother. And from that silence, the First Legion was cursed, for the Lion did not die. He sleeps, and his sons live forever in the shadow of that sleep. The duel with Luther had broken more than Caliban. It had broken the First Legion's heart. When the warp storm tore their homeworld apart, when the fallen were scattered into eternity, when the lion collapsed under the psychic blow of betrayal, the dark angels were left leaderless. Their pre-march did not die, but neither did he rise again. He was taken into the depths of the rock, the fortress carved from Caliban's largest fragment. There, in chambers hidden from all but the highest of his sons, his body was laid to rest, still breathing, but unmoving, neither dead nor alive. A mystery even to those who watched over him. What exactly happened to the lion in those final moments is still debated in whispers, even within the Dark Angels themselves. Some say Luther's psychic strike wounded his soul, casting it adrift beyond mortal comprehension. Others claim the lion chose his own sleep, retreating into some hidden war against powers unseen. There are even those who whisper he walks the tunnels of the rock in spirit, a shadowed guardian haunting his sons. But none can say for certain, and none dare speak of it beyond their own. Luther, too, survived. Captured after the fall, he was imprisoned deep within the rock, bound in eternal chains. His mind was shattered, broken by the warp's backlash. Yet from his lips spilled a prophecy. He claimed the lion was not gone forever, that one day, when the Imperium was most in need, the lion would rise again. The Dark Angels, bound by secrecy and pride, buried these words as they buried their shame. But in the depths of their hearts, some believed. The rest of the fallen were scattered across the galaxy, cast into time and space by the warp storm that consumed Caliban. Some landed in the 31st millennium, others in the 41st, a few perhaps in ages yet to come. They wandered the stars as cursed relics, half-remembered warriors of a broken legion, some seeking redemption, others embracing damnation. Wherever they went, they carried the truth of Caliban's betrayal. And for the Dark Angels, that was intolerable. Thus began the hunt. The Dark Angels swore an oath of silence, so absolute it bordered on madness. None outside their legion could ever know what had happened on Caliban. The Imperium believed the first had emerged from the heresy untarnished. They allowed that belief to stand. But within, they knew the truth. They had been broken, their brothers scattered, their pre-march struck down by betrayal. And so they formed the Inner Circle. The Inner Circle was no council of honor. It was a cabal of secrecy. Only those judged utterly loyal, utterly capable of bearing the weight of their shame, were admitted. These chosen knew the truth of Caliban, of Luther, of the fallen. They knew that the Dark Angel's duty was no longer only to the Imperium. It was to themselves, to their secret, to the eternal hunt. From that moment onward, the Dark Angels became more than warriors of the Emperor. They became hunters of their own kind. Across 10,000 years, across 1,000,000 battlefields, they carried out their hunt in silence. Whenever whispers of the fallen arose, whenever one of their cursed brethren appeared, the Dark Angels would strike. Not with fanfare, not with honor, but with secrecy. Entire worlds burned, entire populations silenced, simply to conceal the truth of their pursuit. To the Imperium, these actions were strange, suspicious, but to the Dark Angels, they were necessary. Their secret could never be revealed. The rock itself became their sanctuary and their prison. Within its depths lay the lion's body, entombed in a chamber none but the highest dared approach. Some say he lies upon a throne of stone, hands upon his blade, as if in restless slumber. Others whisper that his body flickers with faint signs of life, his wounds never fully healed, his breath shallow but unbroken. And deeper still lies Luther, chained, mad, yet still muttering of prophecies the Inner Circle dares not believe but cannot forget. The centuries passed. The Imperium changed. The Great Crusade became memory. The Horus Heresy became legend. The First Legion became chapter, divided into successors in Guilliman's second founding. But though the Dark Angels became many, they remained one in their burden. The Unforgiven, as they came to be called, all carried the same secret. All joined in the same hunt. All bound by the same silence. Their obsession became their identity. Where once they had been the Emperor's prototype, Now they were shadows hunting shadows. Where once they had been first among equals, now they were distrusted, their secrecy an open wound that drew suspicion from allies and enemies alike. And yet they endured. They hunted. They carried their shame not as weakness, but as weapon. The hunt for the fallen was never-ending. Across the galaxy, across the millennia, the dark angels pursued their scattered brethren. They captured some, killed others, dragged still more in chains into the rock, where their fates remain unknown. They never spoke of it, not to the Inquisition, not to the Mechanicus, not even to their closest allies among the other chapters. It was their burden alone, their sin alone, their secret alone, and always, in the shadows of the rock, their lions slept. This is the paradox of the First Legion. They are the most loyal of all, their devotion to the Emperor unbroken, their victories countless. And yet they are also the most distrusted, their secrecy a poison, their obsession a curse. They are the hunters of traitors, but also the hunted, forever fearing the truth will out. And somewhere in their fortress monastery, in a chamber sealed against the galaxy, their pre-march lies in silence. Not dead, not alive, waiting. Perhaps Luther was right. Perhaps one day the lion will awaken, when the Imperium teeters on the edge of ruin, when chaos threatens all, when the Emperor's realm cries out for salvation. Perhaps then the lion will rise, blade in hand, to lead his sons once more. Or perhaps not. Perhaps he will never wake. Perhaps the First Legion is doomed to hunt shadows forever, bound to a secret that will consume them, until they themselves become the very fallen they despise. This is the fate of the First Legion. Not glory, not trust, but silence, shame, and an eternal hunt. The true measure of a people is not what they do in light, but what they hide in darkness. The Dark Angels have mastered both. In the 41st millennium, when the stars themselves leak despair and the Emperor sits upon his throne as a husk of power, the First Legion's secret has not died. It has multiplied, metastasized into doctrine, into ritual, into an obsession that defines whole chapters. The Dark Angels became the Unforgiven, hunters of their own kind, wardens of a guilt that spans 10,000 years. When the Imperium rebuilt after the Heresy, the legions of Astartes were reorganized into chapters. The Dark Angels survived that reordering, but they did not dissolve their truth. Instead, they codified it. Their structure hardened into ritual and rank. Their first company became the Death Wing, Terminator-locked and Templar-hard, the hammer that descends when a fallen is found. Their second company formed the Raven Wing, fast, lethal, the Legion's long arm that chases rumor and whispers across light years. The rest of their companies obeyed a discipline both ancient and private. Across this order, a single doctrine runs like a vein, the hunt. From the rock, a fortress monastery born of Caliban's shattered crust, the inner circle rules. This is not a council of generals. The inner circle is a corridor of secrets. Only a handful of masters hold membership, and fewer still carry every truth. They guard the names, the locations, the fragmentary records of the fallen. They judge who among the chapter may learn, who must be kept in ignorance, who must be broken if they are tainted by the knowledge. The inner circle decides when to act, when to bury a corpse, when to purge a system in quiet. Their authority is absolute, their loyalty to the chapter absolute, their willingness to deceive the Imperium complete. So the Dark Angels do things the Imperium does not ask for and does not understand. They hunt the fallen across a galaxy that has grown stranger and deadlier. A fallen turns up in a subsector as a petty warlord. A fallen becomes a prophet for a cult. A fallen rises as a champion of a dying world. The Dark Angels answer like a shadow, a raven wing strike in the night to capture, a death wing strike to crush, a whispered removal to erase witnesses. Entire populations vanish from imperial records simply because they saw what the Dark Angels could not allow to be revealed. In doing so, the chapter courts the suspicion of allies. The Inquisition stares with interest and suspicion. Mechanicus groups grow wary of any chapter that buries its deeds. The Dark Angels accept that distrust. It is part payment for their secret. Across the millennia, successors were founded from the Dark Angels' gene seed as the Imperium's reach was rebuilt. Those successor chapters share blood, and many share secrecy. They are bound by the same oath, or, more often, by the same silence. Collectively, they are often called the Unforgiven, not merely a name, but a condition. To be an Unforgiven is to carry a truth isolation will not let you shout. It is to be entrusted with a duty no other chapter can bear, to stop your own kin from dragging mankind into a shame that would unmake faith in the Emperor. This duty warps everything. The Deathwing are the chapter's confessional and executioner. Their Terminator armor is not only for war, but for the long, close work of reclaiming brotherhood, by force if necessary. The Raven Wing ride not only to battle, but to hunt rumors, to parse the prattling of warp-tainted psychers, to follow the faintest trail a fallen might leave. Scout companies become proof hunters. Chaplains and librarians are split between faith and secrecy, trained to bury evidence as deftly as they uplift courage. Even battle doctrines are tinted by the hunt. Operations designed to minimize witnesses, to isolate potential fallen, to retrieve and extract without drawing the Inquisition's unwelcome eyes. But paradoxically, the Dark Angels remain fervently loyal to the Imperium. Their banners still bear the Imperial icon. They still repay the Emperor's debt with blood and steel. They were at the forefront of crusades in the 41st millennium. They still hold worlds. They still die for Terra. Loyalty and secrecy are their twin obsessions. It is this tension that makes them both indispensable and suspect. To the High Lords of Terra and to the Inquisition, they are difficult allies. They perform impossible tasks, but they do so in ways that defy oversight. The question never fully goes away. What else do they hide? The hunt itself has changed with the ages. Fallen who were once scattered by warp storms can now be found through databanks, through the testimonies of desperate cultists, through the track patterns of illegal relic trade. In some cases, the fallen have become more monstrous. Demonic princes birthed from corrupted dosages of gene seed and warp exposure, or mortals risen to star power with fragments of Caliban's malice. Each capture is a moral and practical calculus. Kill or whole, imprison or cleanse, reveal or silence. The Inner Circle's verdicts echo for centuries. Names struck, heritages erased, entire histories excised, so the larger lie, that the Dark Angels remained wholly loyal, can be preserved. This maintenance of a lie comes at cost. The chapter has a warrior caste devoted to secrecy more than to glory. Their relationships with other chapters are guarded. With the Adeptus Mechanicus, their dealings are transactional and furtive. With the Inquisition, they are tense chess partners. At times, this has erupted into violence. Inquisitors investigating overly persistent disappearances have narrowly survived run-ins with Deathwing squads. When the Imperium's organs probe too deep, the Dark Angels answer not with apology, but with redoubled silence. They will not trade their secret for acceptance. Yet there are also paradoxes of nobility here. Many Dark Angels are haunted by the same shame that drives the hunt. Whole companies carry guilt not only for the crimes of the fallen, but for the choices made to conceal those crimes. The chapter's rituals read like penitence, the cloaks in which their veterans swathe themselves, the private oaths whispered in the rock's vaults, the small acts of remembrance paid to the absent lion. Some of their brightest warriors, chaplains, masters, even librarians, spend moments in private searching for a different path, a way to reconcile the duty to the Imperium with the duty to confess. These are tensions that never resolve. They become the bone structure of the chapter's culture. The rock itself remains the axis of that culture, a fortress, a prison, a reliquary. Its corridors are lined with sigils, icons, and relics taken from the time of Caliban. Its inner chambers hold the lion's wound and the records of Luther and the fallen, read only by those sworn to the highest grade of the Inner Circle. From there, the Raven Wing launches, the Deathwing descends, and the search continues. New Fallen are found in the most ordinary spaces. A planetary governor who used the Fallen's teachings to subjugate a population. A warlord who wields a corrupted relic that bears the Dark Angel's old sigil. A psyker who dreams of a forest world that no longer exists. Each is a thread the chapter must cut before the garment of the Imperium unravels. And always, there is the question of redemption. Some dark angels whisper that the hunt is penance, that the fallen can be reclaimed, that the lion will one day wake and forgive those who have been found. Others believe the fallen are irredeemable, that the only mercy is the spear. Both impulses live in the same chapter, knowing they cannot both triumph. Their oscillation shapes strategy and doctrine, and the fragile humanity still left within the Unforgiven. So the 41st Millennium sees the Dark Angels, at once more powerful and more alone than ever. They hold relics and enact deeds that might save worlds. They also erase names and silence planets to preserve a secret that would topple faith. Loyal to a corpse throne, they are also the heirs of a guilt the Imperium refuses even to glimpse. It is a tightrope walk on the edge of damnation, one the chapter has walked for 10,000 years. And here's the final, cruel beauty of their tragedy. The Dark Angels are perhaps the Imperium's truest servants because they are willing to do what others cannot. They will pay the price of secrecy with their honor, their reputations, their friendships across the chapters. They will carry isolation as a duty. They will do this because the lion sleeps in the rock, because the fallen crawl the stars, because the inner circle judges that the truth would damn humanity more surely than their silence. In the end, the Dark Angels are a mirror for the Imperium itself, a power that preserves at the cost of compassion, a civilization that hides its rot so it might endure. The paradox stands plain as a blade. They are the most loyal and the most distrusted, the most honorable and the most secretive, the keepers of the galaxy's oldest wound and the hiders of its deepest shame. When you walk the dark corridors of a ship in the Segmentum Obscurus, and you hear a whisper of armor and a muffled prayer, remember this. Somewhere, a rider in black and bone is hunting a brother. Somewhere, behind the vaults of an asteroid monastery, men carry a truth they will never speak. Somewhere, the lion lies dreaming, and the Unforgiven keep watch. If you came seeking revelation, you have found it. But the Dark Angel's greatest secret is not a story that ends with understanding. It ends in an oath. It ends in a hunt. It ends always in silence. And in that silence, the final line must fall like a blade. The first were first to be forged, first to fall, and first to hide what they had become. And perhaps there is no harsher fate than to be the most loyal of all, and the least trusted.